I'm Bob Riggio, and with me again is another one of our many veterans that we have located throughout the Black Hills. And this is what News Center 1 loves to do, is to honor our veterans. And one way that we can honor our veterans is just to have them sit down, a little bit of a conversation, and tell us a little bit about their experiences in the military. And with me is Thad Richards, one of our veterans. And Thad, thank you so much for joining us. I truly appreciate that. So why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about your background, where you grew up.
Was born in Washington, D.C.
Really?
Yeah. And my father died just before my 3rd birthday. My mother remarried in 41, and she married an Army sergeant, and we were transferred to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. So I grew up in eastern Kansas, but I didn't have the goal of being an Army personnel. Well, this goes back to 1954, and I wanted to fly. I wanted to be an aerial gunner. It just seemed like the ideal thing for me. And when you go through basic training, you get to the point where they say, well, okay, we have needs of the Air Force, and we also take what you want to do in consideration.
Sure.
Well, I'd been taking code, and I could send and receive 10 words a minute at that time. So I go in and meet this counselor, and he said, you realize now the needs of the Air Force comes first. And I said, I understand that. He said, what do you want to do? I want to go to gunnery school. Gunnery school's closed. My balloon just shot out of the air then. He said, besides that, you don't have a choice. You're going to become a radio operator. And he said, the only choice you got is whether you want to be airborne or ground interceptor. And I said, forget that ground stuff. Put me on an airplane. Yeah. That's how I started out. And like I say, I spent 2 years doing that before I got into the boom field. That kind of disappointed my stepfather, but I went in the Air Force in 1954. In-flight refueling for all 22 years.
KC-135?
And the KC-97 before that. It was a 4-engine prop-driven aircraft.
Wow.
It was designed by Boeing. It never lived up to its expectation. Underpowered. Jets couldn't keep up with us. In refueling any jet bomber, we had to go into a 350 foot per minute descent in order for them to stay on the end of the boom.
So in other words, you were flying the boom?
No, you go through your checklist, and the boom is stowed up under the airplane in the stowed position. You unstow it, bring it down.
And you're actually flying it?
Yeah.
I mean, you could fly it up, fly it down.
You're laying on what they call the ironing board. Your prone position, and your elevator control stick is below you, and all your other controls are up on top. My pilot on board my aircraft will tell me, boom, you have permission to go on and talk to the receiver.
Okay.
So it was my show then. I can tell him over the radios, or I have control lights that are built into the airplane underneath on the belly of the airplane, and they tell him to move forward, backwards, up, down. If you get in some dicey situations where you're refueling reconnaissance aircraft, you go radio silence. You don't talk to them at all. Like if you're off the coast of Cuba. Cuba's got you on your radar, but they don't know what you're doing out there.
Okay.
So you don't want them to know what you're doing, that you've got a receiver aircraft behind you. At that time, I was stationed at Offutt Air Force Base, and I was flying Looking Glass. And I flew that and some special modified aircraft from 64 until 69. I transferred to RAF Mildenhall, and I was flying on the airborne command post for Europe. So it was interesting, it really was. Your max takeoff was 299,000 in the KC-135. Like we'd take fighters to Guam during Vietnam.
Yeah.
And excess pilots, or fighter pilots, they'd put them on the tankers. And there was a jump seat that sat right between the two pilots. And these guys would say, can I sit there, these spare pilots? Sure. Well, we were used to going, taking up 10,000 feet of 11,000, 12,000 runway, So they'd sit there and they'd have their hands up on the back of the pilot seats, and you could watch their knuckles, and they would get whiter and whiter and whiter the closer you got to the end of the runway. I was stationed at Smoky Hill Air Force Base. A lot of people haven't. That was at Salina, Kansas. And then from Salina, I went to Moses Lake, Washington, at Larson Air Force Base. After Larson, I went to Offutt Air Force Base. And Offutt, I went to RAF Mildenhall in England. And when I came back from RAF Mildenhall, I came to Ellsworth Air Force Base. Well, I flew Chrome Dome, and I don't know if you know what Chrome Dome is.
No, I don't.
It's a refueling of aircraft that are loaded with nuclear weapons.
Oh, boy.
And they were 24-hour flying around the world. And there was one refueling area up in Alaska. It was called Cold Coffee Refueling Area. And the airplanes would come across from the East Coast over the top of Canada and come down through that refueling area. Well, this night we had to go on strip alert, and our shift was from midnight until 8 in the morning.
Okay. Where were you located? Up in Alaska?
This was Eielson Air Force Base, just outside of Fairbanks.
Okay.
Now you would like that.
62 below and no relief in sight. Oh my God. That's not wind chill either. That's ambient
that's
air
raw
temperature. That's ambient air temperature.
Yep. Yep. Like I said, we were on the airplane that night, went to work, and it was 62 below zero.
What was the temperature on the airplane?
Well, they put heaters on the airplane.
They did have heaters.
Yeah, they had what they called Coleman heaters. But I went to work that night, it was 62 below zero, the temperature went up 44. We got off at 8 o'clock and it was still 22 below zero. That 135 would perform like a fighter. In fact, when I first went to Eielson in cold temperatures, we were going through our takeoff performance charts and everything, the pilots were. Yeah. And they said, we're going to weigh almost 300,000. It's going to take us 9,000 feet of runway. And I think we were off the runway in 5,600 feet.
I bet.
So it was really something.
Did you ever have any problems?
Yes.
Tell us about that, if you don't mind.
No, no problem. We were sent to Loring Air Force Base in northern Maine, and they had a tanker task force set up there, and we were going to fly fighters to England. This guy that I was refueling, I don't think he was checked out, to tell you the truth. He was all over the sky, hitting the limits.
What sort of aircraft was this?
Oh, gosh.
Was it a fighter or?
Yeah, I think it was F-16, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
But there's a hoist cable attached to that boom to a motor up in the tail cone. And when you get through refueling, you just put it in, it pulls it up and locks it,
sure,
so it can't come down. Well, he dived under the aircraft
and
tore that cable right off. So we had to land back at Loring and drug the boom down the runway.
You couldn't fly it up?
No, you can't do it. Sparks were flying. They used to foam the runways, a strip down the center, and the pilots would land so their nose wheel was right on that strip, and then the boom would drag in the foam. But they found out there was no explosions or anything like that, so they quit that. Yeah, interesting times. I was proud to serve, to tell you the truth.